The air here has a thin bite to it, the kind that dries your throat and sharpens the smell of metal. The road looks normal at first, until you notice the surface is subtly wrong, patched, rippled, slightly sunk, like a blanket pulled tight over something shifting underneath. A seam in the pavement leaks a faint ribbon of steam, steady as breath. The soil along the shoulders pale and tired, and the weeds grow in uneven patches, as if the ground cannot agree on a season. A sign warns you away, but the warning is not the unsettling part. The unsettling part is how quiet it is. No storefronts, no schoolyard noise, no porch conversations, just wind through scrub trees and the soft hiss of heat leaving the earth. Centralia is not simply abandoned, it is displaced by a fire that moved into the ground and refused to leave. So which is it? Curse or consequence? Myth or mechanics? Accident or intent? Chapter 1. Memorial Day Spark. A cleanup becomes a match. Centralia did not begin as a cautionary tale. It began as a working town, one of many in Pennsylvania's anthracite region, built around coal seams that sat deep enough to require courage, skill, and endurance to reach. The town's shape, its streets and churches and rows of homes, formed around what the ground could provide. By the early 1960s, Centralia was not a booming frontier. It was a place with routines. People went to work, came home, tended gardens, attended services, visited cemeteries on holidays. The ordinary gravity of life held it together. And then, near the end of May in 1962, something small happened that did not look like the end of a town. A dump fire. The story is often told in one clean line. On Memorial Day weekend, Centralia set fire to its landfill to clean it up, and the fire slipped into the mine workings below. That general outline appears again and again across summaries and official state descriptions. But even the beginning has a haze around it, the kind that gathers whenever a disaster grows slowly. The Wikipedia summary notes debate about the original cause and start date, even as it anchors the widely cited date of May 27, 1962. Some accounts suggest the trash pit, located in an old strip mine, had an opening into older mine pathways that should have been sealed. Others suggest hot ash or debris may have been dumped earlier, leaving a smoldering source that flared up when oxygen and new fuel arrived. The point is not to litigate every minute of the first day. The point is that Centralia's beginning was not cinematic. It was practical, casual, local. The fire was not supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be handled. Early efforts focused on what people know how to do with a fire. Put water on it, stir the debris, put water on it again. The flames would appear, be knocked down, then appear again. The town would respond the way a town responds to a stubborn nuisance. But beneath the visible smoke at the dump was a deeper reality. This wasn't only garbage burning. This was a region with layers of coal and old mine corridors. In the state's own framing, the fire originated as an intentional burning of residential trash in an abandoned strip pit and then moved into the abandoned deep mine workings of the Buck Mountain coal bed. If you want to understand Centralia, you have to understand how a small surface fire becomes a subterranean resident. Fire wants three things: fuel, oxygen, and a pathway. Centralia had all three, and the pathway was already carved into the earth. Listen to the wind. Chapter 2. Coal Seam Inferno. A fire finds its corridors. A house fire behaves like a predator you can see. You notice it, you measure it, you point to it, you call it by what it is. An underground coal fire behaves like something else. It is not in one place. It is in the places that fuel and oxygen allow. It does not roar across a horizon like a forest fire because it does not need a horizon. It has tunnels. The Centralia mine fire has been burning in abandoned mine workings since May 1962, according to Pennsylvania DEP's Centralia Resources page. That one sentence contains the whole horror and the whole banality of the situation. Burning, underground, abandoned workings, decades. When a coal seam ignites, it can travel along the seam, moving where the rock allows it, where oxygen enters through cracks and boreholes and old passages. It can go deeper, it can spread laterally, it can leave pockets of heat and then reappear where conditions change. In Centralia, the fire's relationship with oxygen became the story. Not oxygen in an abstract chemistry sense, but oxygen as something the landscape supplies, a crack in the ground, a fractured layer, a collapsed shaft that creates airflow. The fire becomes less like a single campfire and more like a breathing system. That is why it resisted simple tactics. Smothering works when you can cover the fire, but Centralia's fire was not only where the smoke was just a symptom of where the fire was meeting air. The fire also traveled through a history of mining. Decades earlier, miners carved out what the ground could give them. Those voids did not disappear when mining ended. They remained, some collapsed, some stable, some partially filled, all of them part of a hidden geography. Centralia was a town built on top of that hidden geography without having to think about it every day, until it had to think about it every day. And that is the psychological weight of an underground fire. You cannot look at it directly. You infer it from steam and smell and sudden warmth. You learn its presence like you learn the presence of weather. The fire turns into a constant question beneath ordinary life. Where is it now? Is it moving toward us? Is it under the street? Is it under the school? The state's monitoring and mapping efforts reflect that uncertainty. Pennsylvania DEP describes ongoing monitoring, including visual surface monitoring and subsurface borehole temperature monitoring. A place becomes a scientific site not because anyone wants it to be, but because it has become unlivable without knowledge. This is the quiet transformation Centralia underwent early. It stopped being merely a town and became a problem that needed measuring. Chapter 3. The Town Above a Map of Voids. What Mining Leaves Behind. To understand Centralia's fate, it helps to picture a town and then picture what is not seen. Above ground, streets, houses, churches, cemeteries, a small grid that people navigate with muscle memory. Below ground, the opposite of solidity. Chambers, corridors, pillars of coal left to hold roofs, collapsed sections that form unpredictable pathways. It is a world shaped by labor. Coal towns carry a certain kind of quiet toughness. The work is difficult. The winters can be sharp. Families learn to measure money carefully. People learn to depend on each other because underground work creates an intimate relationship with risk. Centralia was part of the anthracite region, known for hard coal, valued for its energy density and its burn characteristics. Mining built the place and also created the conditions that later made it vulnerable. This is where Centralia becomes more than a strange tourist story. It becomes a story about extraction, infrastructure, and what communities inherit from the industries that form them. An underground mine is not only a hole, it is a designed system. Airflow matters, access points matter, the distribution of pillars matters. When mines are abandoned, those systems remain in partial form, and nature begins to reclaim them in uneven ways. Roofs collapse, forming fractures, water moves, changing pressures, the surface can settle slowly. Most towns do not have to think about what the ground is doing. Centralia had to learn. The fire turned the underground map into an active force. Heat changed rock, expanded materials, weakened supports. Areas that were stable became less stable. Air and gas moved where it had not moved before. The town began to experience a kind of betrayal from below, not because the ground was malicious, but because it was responding to a new condition. Even the vocabulary changed. Sinkholes, subsidence, venting, carbon monoxide, boreholes. These are not words that appear in ordinary conversations at the grocery store. But in Centralia, they became part of the weather report. And there is another quiet shift that happens in places like this. People start interpreting everything through the fire. A cough is no longer just a cough. A strange smell is no longer just dampness. A crack in a wall is no longer just settling. The fire becomes a lens. That is how long emergencies reshape daily life. They turn mundane details into warnings. The ground also becomes suspicious. Children are told not to wander. Gardens are watched. Basement doors are opened with caution. Folks notice when snow melts in patches. They notice when the air feels heavy in a low spot. Centralia's story is sometimes told with a kind of thrill. It should not be. The deeper reality is that living with uncertainty for years is exhausting. It is a slow drain. And the town, at this stage, was still trying to hold itself together. Chapter 4. Smoke on the Playground. When the ground stops behaving. The story that people repeat most often about Centralia's turning point is not a policy decision. It is a moment in a yard. Accounts widely describe a near-fatal sinkhole incident in the early 1980s involving a child who fell into a sudden opening and was rescued. Many tellings present it as a wake-up call that made the danger feel undeniable. Whether you know every detail or not, the meaning is the same. The threat was no longer only smoke and smell. The ground itself could fail. Sinkholes are not supernatural. They are the physical result of voids and weakened support. In mining regions, subsidence and collapse can occur even without fire. The fire simply accelerates and complicates the risks by weakening coal pillars and changing the underground structure. And still, when it happens, it feels like something out of a story older than science. The earth opens. Steam rises. People shout. Someone is pulled out. The place is marked in memory forever. After events like that, you begin to see the town differently. A grassy lot is no longer just a lot. It is a surface over a possibility. A road is no longer reliable. It is a layer. A playground is no longer purely a place of laughter. It is a place where the ground must be trusted, and trust is now conditional. This is where the myth layer begins to cling more tightly. When the earth behaves strangely, people search for explanations that match the feeling. The feeling is not technical. The feeling is ancient, like living above a sleeping animal. Visitors later came and described it in dramatic terms. They used words like hell and curse because those words fit their emotional response. But for residents, the dramatic language was less interesting than the daily math. Is it safe to stay? Is it safe to raise children? Is it safe to let the kids play outside? Is it safe to sleep with windows shut? And if you decide it is not safe, what does leaving do to you? Leaving is not just geography, it is identity. You leave the place that made you. So people delayed, people argued, people hoped the fire could be stopped. The fire did not care about hope. It cared about air and fuel, and it kept moving. Chapter 5. Poisoned Heart. When air becomes the enemy. Heat is dramatic. You can feel it. You can point to melted snow and say, something is wrong here. But Centralia's deadliest element was not heat itself, it was what the heat produced and moved. Coal fires generate gases. Some are irritating, some are toxic, and some are deadly because they displace oxygen or interfere with the body's ability to carry oxygen. Carbon monoxide is the most discussed because it is odorless and dangerous and because it fits the fear, a threat you cannot smell. Pennsylvania DEP's Mine Fire FAQ is direct about major hazards, toxic gas migration, and the unpredictability of pathways. Think about what it means to live with that. It means your safety depends on pathways you cannot see. It means a crack in a basement wall could become a route. It means the ground is not only unstable, it is communicating with the air you breathe. Residents reported headaches. Some accounts described dizziness. People became sensitive to odors and smoke. The town's relationship with basements changed because basements are where air can settle, where gases can collect. A basement that once held canned food becomes a space of unease. And the fear is not always loud. It is not always panic. Often it is quiet vigilance. People crack windows even in cold weather. People pay attention to how the air feels in low spots. People ask each other about symptoms. The town becomes a network of informal monitoring. When institutions step in, the language changes again. Monitors, readings, safety thresholds, evacuations. Those words turn private fear into public management. Centralia's story is full of attempted solutions, but it is also full of this, the constant work of living in a place that can harm you without announcing itself. At the same time, the economic reality began tightening. Coal mining in the region had already been declining and changing. When the town became known as a place with toxic gas and unstable ground, it affected investment, property, and business confidence. Even if the fire never reached your street, it reached your future. The result is a quiet kind of erosion. People move away because of fear. Others move because there is less work. Businesses close because customers leave. The town's normal begins to feel thinner, like a fabric worn in too many places. Centralia was being hollowed out above ground now, too. And for a while, people still tried to fix it. Chapter 6. Trenches and Slurry. The limits of control. There are disasters where the solution is clear but difficult. Centralia was worse than that. The solution was not even clear. If you cannot see the fire, you have to find it first. If you find it, you have to isolate it. If you isolate it, you have to cut off oxygen and remove fuel pathways. And every step is expensive, disruptive, and uncertain. Pennsylvania DEP's materials describe a range of mine fire control techniques used across the state. Excavation, trenching to isolate, flushing mine voids with non-combustible material, sealing surfaces, and more. In Centralia, multiple projects were tried, including trenching and efforts to block or isolate the fire. Yet, the fire continued. It is tempting to narrate this as incompetence. It is more accurate to narrate it as complexity and scale, meaning limited resources. Imagine digging a trench meant to block a fire that does not have a simple front. Imagine working in terrain that is itself unstable. Imagine trying to predict how oxygen will move when you seal one opening and the pressure changes elsewhere. Imagine that the mine pool conditions can create additional risks. Centralia became a site where engineering met the Earth's refusal to be simple. This is also where cost becomes part of the story. Early on, the cost to fully extinguish might have been lower, perhaps manageable. Later, the cost grew. It is a familiar pattern in slow disasters. Delay inflates the required response until the response is no longer realistic. Pennsylvania's chronology page includes a note that an OSM study estimated $663 million would be required to extinguish the fire. The number is stark, not because it is perfect, but because it communicates scale. It tells you the fire outgrew what ordinary programs could afford. DEP's FAQ states plainly that the cost of a complete extinguishment project is beyond the capacity of Pennsylvania's AML program. So the state faced a hard decision: continue fighting a fire underground or move people away from it. It is a decision that feels like surrender, but might also be the only responsible option when control is uncertain and hazard is high. And for residents, it does not feel like strategy. It feels like loss. Chapter 7: The Cost of Staying, When Economics Joins the Fire. Some towns can survive a hazard if the economy is strong enough to absorb it. Centralia did not have that luxury. A coal town's economy depends on labor, extraction, and the infrastructure built around it. When mining declines or shifts, the town must either diversify or shrink. Centralia was already part of a region dealing with broader changes. The fire did not begin that change, but it accelerated it and made it harder to resist. Property values became uncertain. Insurance became complicated. Businesses faced fewer customers. Public services became strained. Even if you wanted to stay, the town began to feel like it was slipping out from under you in ways that had nothing to do with smoke. This is the hidden chapter of many ghost town stories. Economics is often the slowest fire. When people describe Centralia as a place emptied by the mine fire, that is true, but the mine fire also emptied it through secondary effects. A hazard that persists for years becomes an argument against investment. It becomes a reason for young families to move. It becomes a reason for employers to look elsewhere. It turns a town into a question mark. And people do not raise children inside question marks if they can help it. So families left. Some left because they were scared. Others left because there was no longer a stable future. And every departure made the next departure easier. Once your friend leaves, you feel less anchored. Once the neighborhood feels sparse, the place feels less like home and more like an in-between. Centralia began to thin, not only by policy, but by human behavior. This is why later, when buyout programs became available, they did not create the exodus from nothing. They formalized a direction many residents already felt. But formalization still hurts. A buyout is a statement. The town is not worth saving in place, at least not at a price society is willing to pay. That is not a moral judgment, it is a budget judgment. But for the people who live there, budgets feel personal when they decide where you can exist. Chapter 8: The Exodus. Buyouts, Empty Porches, Closed Curtains. Leaving a town is not only moving, it is deciding what to do with a life. By the early 1980s, relocation efforts increased. Business Insider's summary describes the federal government approving a $42 million buyout plan and notes that most residents were relocated by the 1980s, with the fire continuing underneath. DEP's materials also reference the federal appropriation and the relocation efforts that followed. Numbers help you understand scale, but they do not help you understand the human texture of leaving. Imagine a street where every home holds a history: Christmas mornings, arguments, births, meals, small routines. Imagine those homes slowly emptying. First one moves, then another, then another. The physical signs are quiet: a porch that no longer has chairs, a yard that no longer has toys, curtains drawn and never opened, a driveway that stays empty. And the emotional signs are quieter: fewer conversations at the store, fewer people at services, fewer faces you recognize. Sometimes the town still looks like itself. Many buildings stand for a while, but the town is not buildings, it is people. When people leave, the place becomes a shell even before demolition. Relocation also creates a strange moral geography. Some residents accept buyouts and leave. Some resist. Some cannot decide. Some are angry at those who stay because staying can look like denial. Some are angry at those who leave because leaving can look like betrayal. But most of it is not ideology. Most of it is pain. A check can help you buy a new house. It cannot buy you a new childhood street. A check can move your furniture. It cannot move your memories. So people left carrying something heavy that no moving truck can hold. And the fire stayed. Chapter 9. Condemned. Eminent domain and the idea of an ending. In 1992, the state condemned properties in Centralia. It is a line often repeated in summaries. The government condemned the town and claimed the real estate through eminent domain. Eminent domain is usually discussed in terms of rights and compensation. In Centralia, it is also a psychological marker. It tells you the town is not only unsafe, it is officially closed. But the ground did not sign the paperwork. The fire kept burning. Pennsylvania DEP's Centralia resources continue to present the situation as ongoing, with monitoring and documentation. The fire did not end when the town was legally reduced. This is a strange thing about long disasters. Institutions can move on in ways geology cannot. For the residents who remained, eminent domain did not feel like a tidy ending. It felt like being told your home is no longer allowed to be a home. Some fought. Legal battles took place over years. The details can be complex, but the emotional core is simple. People do not like being told that their existence is invalid. The town, by this stage, had also lost much of its infrastructure. Buildings were demolished, lots were cleared. The place became increasingly open, increasingly overgrown. In a way, the fire and the state policy combined into one effect: erasure. And then came something small that felt huge: the zip code. Many public accounts note that Centralia lost its zip code in 2002, and mail service was shifted to a neighboring zip code. Business Insider includes this in its summary of the town's decline. A Centralia-focused site also describes the letter stating the old zip code was no longer valid and the new zip code would be used. This is not only mail, it is identity. It is being removed from a system of addresses. A town without a zip code is a town being gently disconnected. And yet, Centralia's story did not fully end there. Chapter 10. Those Who Refused. The Last Residents and a Life Contract. Long after most people left, a handful remained. They are often described as stubborn holdouts, as if they were characters in a story about pride. The truth is likely quieter. People stay for reasons that don't fit headlines: family ties, financial constraints, emotional anchoring, refusal to be displaced twice in one lifetime. Business Insider notes that in 2013, remaining residents were granted the right to live there for the rest of their lives, and that as of the 2020 census, there were 5 residents. Imagine what that agreement feels like from inside it. You are allowed to live out your life in the place you know, but the place is not allowed to outlive you. The town's future is written as a countdown, one life at a time. For outsiders, that sounds dramatic. For the people living it, it might feel like a compromise between dignity and inevitability. Daily life in a nearly empty town becomes a different kind of routine. You know the roads differently because many streets no longer go anywhere. You know which places feel warmer in winter. You know where visitors tend to park. You learn to live with occasional curiosity seekers and the uneven attention of media. Some visitors arrive quietly, others do not. This is where Centralia becomes complicated again. The last residents did not ask to become symbols, but symbols are what the internet makes. A person in a near-empty town becomes a character in other people's stories. And still, imagine the small acts that continue. Tending a yard, sweeping a porch, looking at a tree line where a neighbor's house used to stand. A town is a web. When the web is cut, the remaining strands feel strangely exposed. This chapter is important because it reminds us that Centralia is not only a geological anomaly, it is a human place, even when only a few humans remain. And it sets the stage for the artifact that became Centralia's most famous surface, the broken highway. Chapter 11. Highway to Nowhere. Route 61 breaks, then becomes a canvas. Roads usually fail slowly. They develop potholes, they get patched again. In Centralia, part of Route 61 failed in a way that made it look like the ground had shrugged. The pavement cracked, it buckled, in some places it split open into long, jagged seams that exposed what was beneath. On cold days, steam rose from those seams, turning the road into a visual confession. Photographs from the abandoned roadway show steam lifting from fissures and graffiti painted across what became a strange corridor of ruin. For a while, this abandoned stretch became a destination. People called it Graffiti Highway. They treated it as a public canvas. They took photographs, they left messages. Some messages were crude, some were thoughtful, and most were simply proof. I was here. This is where the documentary tone matters. Centralia is not an amusement. That road was not built to be art. It was built to carry people through a living community. Its failure is part of the town's loss, not an attraction to be consumed. Still, it happened. Centralia's image spread, the abandoned road became iconic, and the site drew attention that created its own pressures and liabilities. Uncovering PA's description notes the graffiti highway eventually being covered with dirt mounds and the broader context of the road's damage and closure due to the underground fire. Even if you never step foot there, you can understand why the image resonated. A smoking road feels like a metaphor in itself, the infrastructure of everyday life buckling under a problem you cannot see. And this is the mid-script rehook, the point where the story shifts again. In a moment, we'll get to the detail that changes everything, why Centralia became less about extinguishing a fire and more about learning to live with an unending process. Chapter 12. The Underworld Story. Gateway to Hell or Human Shorthand. Centralia's folklore did not arrive out of nowhere. It arrived because the place behaves like folklore. The ground smokes. The road cracks. The air has a mineral sting. The town empties, but the heat remains. If you stand in a quiet spot and hear steam hiss from a seam, your mind reaches for language that matches the feeling. People say hell because it is the simplest word for heat that doesn't belong. This is the myth layer. Visitors talk about a gateway to the underworld. They talk about curses. They talk about a town punished for sins or greed. Sometimes it is joking. Sometimes it is half serious. Sometimes it is an attempt to make the story feel bigger than it already is. But the grounded explanation is not small either. Coal seam fires exist around the world. They can burn for decades or longer. They are notoriously difficult to extinguish because the fuel is vast and the pathways are complex. Centralia is an extreme case, but it is not an impossible one. Pennsylvania DEP's materials emphasize both the feasibility of excavation in theory and the prohibitive cost and scale in practice. So, the verdict remains open in the way your channel format wants it to remain open. If you want a supernatural reading, Centralia offers endless atmosphere to support it. If you want a grounded reading, Centralia offers documentation, monitoring, and a well-understood physical mechanism. What matters is that Centralia demonstrates how myth forms. It forms where the facts are too slow, too invisible, too long-running to satisfy the human need for closure. And Centralia offers no closure. Not yet.
Chapter 13. Pop Culture Flame, when a real place becomes an image people trade. Centralia crossed that threshold. Once a place becomes an image, it is no longer owned by the people who lived there. It becomes a story people tell for their own reasons: curiosity, thrill, metaphor, art. This is not inherently bad. Stories are how humans process disasters, but it creates a risk. The real becomes flattened. Centralia's image often gets reduced to a handful of visuals: steam vents, cracked highway, empty lots, a church standing against a thinning town. Those visuals are true, but they are not complete. The complete story includes the years of trying to fight the fire, the cost of fighting it, the decision to relocate, the erosion of a community, the legal processes that declared the town uninhabitable, and the continued monitoring. In other words, Centralia is not only eerie, it is administrative, it is economic, it is the slow choreography of public safety decisions. Pop culture tends to pull out the eerie part because eerie is what images do best. For your channel, the goal is different. We hold the eerie and we hold the documentation. We refuse to shout, we whisper. So we linger on the quieter textures, the way a road line curves slightly because the ground beneath it changed, the way grass grows unevenly near warmth, the way a place can feel like a memory even when you never lived there. We also hold space for the way attention can feel invasive. A near-empty town becomes a destination. Visitors arrive. Some treat it like a set, some treat it like sacred ground. And Centralia's last residents and the surrounding region have had to live with being observed. This chapter matters because it shows that Centralia did not only burn underground, it also burned through cultural imagination. And imagination is another kind of fire. It spreads. Chapter 14. Nature Reclaims. Warm soil, fast trees, quiet return. If you return to Centralia after many years, you might expect a barren landscape. Instead, you find green. Brush, saplings, thickened tree lines, hillsides turning the color of seasons. In some places, it looks like the woods have simply stepped forward and filled the spaces people left behind. Nature does what it does. It takes opportunities. But in Centralia, nature's return has an unusual partner: heat. Warm soil changes growing patterns. It can keep roots from freezing. It can melt snow faster. It can create odd patches where vegetation looks different, not because the plants are magical, but because the ground is not behaving normally. DEP's FAQ lists environmental impacts of mine fires, including air pollution and heated ground. That matters because it shows Centralia is not frozen in time as a ruin. It is dynamic. The landscape is still evolving. And the visual story becomes paradoxical. A place emptied by fire becomes more green, not less. Visitors sometimes describe it as peaceful now, as if the forest has healed the town. That can be true in a limited sense. Nature can soften harsh edges, but healing is not the same as safety. The fire remains. The ground remains unpredictable in places. The story remains ongoing. So when we film nature reclaiming Centralia, we do it with that awareness. We do not frame it as a happy ending. We frame it as a different kind of continuation. The trees do not erase the loss. They cover it. And covering can look like closure until you remember what still breathes underneath. Chapter 15. The Scientific Town That Isn't a Town. Monitoring a Moving Fire. Centralia became a long-term monitoring site because some problems cannot be solved quickly, and some cannot be solved at all within the budgets and tools available. Pennsylvania DEP's FAQ describes ongoing monitoring practices, including monthly visual monitoring and subsurface monitoring through boreholes. DEP's Centralia resources emphasize that the fire remains in the abandoned workings and that the state continues to manage it within constraints. This is where the story's detail that changes everything becomes clear. The question stopped being, can we put it out? The question became, can we live safely around it? And if not, can we move people away from it responsibly? That shift is the heart of Centralia's outcome, because if you cannot afford full extinguishment and you cannot predict gas migration and subsidence pathways reliably, then the safest path becomes relocation, not because it is emotionally clean, but because it is physically defensible. DEP's FAQ states plainly that excavation could feasibly be done, but would require a very large, expensive project. The chronology includes the $663 million estimate from an OSM study. Those numbers are not simply numbers. They are a description of a boundary, the point where society chooses a different strategy. Centralia also provides a broader lesson about mining legacy issues. The fire did not only ignite coal, it ignited the consequences of an underground landscape built over decades. The mine network, the abandoned workings, the oxygen pathways, the way the surface was built on top of it all, those were historical conditions. So Centralia is both accident and inheritance. It is the spark and the structure. And even now, it is not over. Monitoring continues because the fire can still affect ground stability and air quality in certain zones. And the region remains a reminder that while a town can be erased on paper, the earth does not obey paper. The earth obeys physics. The earth obeys time. Chapter 16. What it means now. Myth layer versus reality layer. Centralia's story lives in two layers, and the layers keep feeding each other. The reality layer is sober. A coal seam fire burns underground in abandoned mine workings. The fire began in the early summer of 1962 with the widely cited date of May 27th, though accounts differ on the precise mechanism. Attempts to control it were costly and ultimately insufficient at the scale required for full extinguishment. Relocation and condemnation emptied the town over time. The myth layer is emotionally honest, even if it is not technically necessary. A town that burns beneath the surface feels like a moral story. A road that cracks and steams feels like a warning delivered by the earth itself. A place emptied by heat feels like a modern ruin, and humans have always told stories about ruins. Centralia holds both layers because the human mind needs both layers. Facts tell you what happened. Myth tells you what it felt like. And Centralia's feeling is difficult to hold because it is ongoing. It denies the neat arc most disaster stories have. It does not climax and end. It smolders and continues. That is why Centralia remains compelling for quiet documentary storytelling. You can watch it like background cinema because the pace is slow. But if you listen closely, the details reward attention. The dates, the budgets, the monitoring, the way policy arrives late, the way a town becomes a place you visit instead of a place you live. Centralia also raises a gentle question for anyone who lives in a region shaped by extraction and industry. What does your ground remember? Not metaphorically, literally. What is beneath you that you do not think about until it changes? Centralia is not asking you to fear the earth, it is asking you to respect it, and to respect the communities built around what the earth provides. Because sometimes the gifts of the ground come with consequences that arrive slowly, long after the original bargain was made. Is not the damage. The strangest part is how normal the light looks on the trees, how ordinary the sky feels over a place that has been extraordinary for decades. Centralia teaches a quiet lesson. Some endings are not endings, they are a long transition into something else. Which place should we walk through next? If you want more calm documentaries like this, you can subscribe. We'll keep the volume low.